Welcome to our Sunday Feast program at ISKCON Ottawa, 212 Somerset East. My name is Krishna Das, and I'm going to be your MC for this evening. So welcome. What you've just participated in is at Kirtan Gora Arti for our beloved deity Sri Sri Gaura Nitai, and just finishing Nishinghadev prayers. And perhaps before we go any further, I see we have a bunch of guests here joining us. Is there anybody here joining us for the first time? You can speak now if you like, or maybe raise your hands. Is anybody coming to? Hey, Lakshminath Prabhu. He's not joining us for the first time. He's been to ISKCON Ottawa many times, but perhaps he's joining us on Zoom for the first time.
Yes.
So that's wonderful. So nobody's here for the first time. So welcome back, everybody. I'm going to start off by introducing our speaker for this evening. We have the good fortune of having His Grace Lakshminath Prabhu join us from Montreal. And Lakshminath Prabhu, you know, we were speaking a little bit before, and we were wondering what kind of introduction to give. And Lakshminath Prabhu was saying, I don't need an introduction. Everybody knows me. I've been to Ottawa many times. But nonetheless, I wanted to share perhaps something that I know about Lakshminath Prabhu. He is one of the first early caretakers of our ISKCON Ottawa Center. And he's a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. And during those days, the Krishna Consciousness movement was expanding quickly and vastly. I think every week or every couple of months, a new temple was opening up somewhere around the world. And so these were, how to say it, the domination days of our ISKCON movement, the great beginnings. And I've spoken to Lakshminath Prabhu many times before, and every time I get the opportunity to hear him speak, I'm always asking, what was it like in those early days? What was it like when you were in ISKCON Ottawa? And he shared so many stories, and some of which maybe I'm going to give a little sneak peek of one that I remember. I was asking him, so how was it like when you were at the temple? What was happening? And he told me, well, we used to have this back home buffet, which now is known as Govinda's. We have a buffet, vegetarian buffet that's been running for many years. But back then it was called back home buffet. And there was a few devotees who were staying at the temple, and they were cooking. And people from the community would come to the buffet. They would take prasadam. And then in one of the apartment buildings next door, they would have a program where they would invite people to come in and talk a little bit about philosophy, share Krishna consciousness. And there was also shifts. Some devotees would go out on book distribution and send out invitations to come to the restaurant or come and join the program. And then they would switch those devotees who were doing, book distribution and sending out invitations. The next day they were cooking, and then the other devotees were going out and sending out invitations. Is that right, Lakshminath Prabhu? That's the gist of it.
Some were collecting, also selling paintings or etchings or flowers, or financially trying to pay all the bills.
Yes, and Prabhu was very instrumental to those beginnings. And now for the last many years, he resides in Montreal. We have an ISKCON temple there as well, with Radha Manohar. And today he has kindly agreed he's accepted our invitation to come on Zoom and give a talk. And this is actually his first time being on Zoom. So welcome to the Zoom world. And Prabhu is going to be sharing some knowledge or insights on the topic of what was the question? What is the goal of family life on the path of Krishna consciousness? So what is the goal of family life on the path of Krishna consciousness? So please take the opportunity to listen and think of some questions. If you have some questions, we're going to leave some time at the end for discussion. So apparently it's a proven fact that the symptom of life is asking questions and speaking. So just so we know that you exist out there, we ask you to take it in, and we would love to hear some realizations, comments, or questions afterwards. So without further ado, over to you, Lakshminath Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna, everyone. I'll just start off by apologizing to Guru Prasad, because probably a month or so ago, he had called me and requested me to do this, and I had refused, thinking that, well, there probably won't be that many people listening to me. There are so many sannyasis and gurus around the world where the disciples have the privilege to hear from them. So I didn't think that, it was, anyway, I didn't particularly accept his invitation, but Krishna Dulal, he's a little bit more forceful in his requests. So I'm always more obliged when he does call me to request me something. So here goes. I'm going to chant Jai Radha Madhava as we normally do on the Sunday programs. And then we'll try to have a little discussion and see what we can say about the Grihastha ashram. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yasodhana Jana Vraja Jana Ramjana Yasodhana Jana Vraja Jana Ramjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yasodhana Jana Vraja Jana Ramjana Yasodhana Jana Vraja Jana Ramjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Vishpad Pramsa Parivrata Kacharya Swaran Shishimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai Jaya Vishnupad Pramsa Parivrata Kacharya Swaran Shishimad Divine Grace Shri Siddhanta Sarvita Ko Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Go Premanandi All glories to the some devotees Hare Krishna All glories to the some devotees Hare Krishna All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga Vishnu Rai Guru Sabra Sabdare Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamane Namaste Sarvati Devi Gauravansh. So I thought we'd start this topic a little bit with a particular verse. This is from the chapter 15 of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, Maivamsho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana manashastam indriyani prakriti karshati, that the living entities in this conditional life are struggling. They're the eternal parts and parcel of Krishna, but they're struggling due to conditional life, which includes the senses and the mind. So this is the position of all living entities in this material world. Everyone is struggling. We are considered to be nitya baddha, conditioned in this material world. And that conditioning, based on the modes of material nature, ignorance, passion, and goodness, has a certain influence upon us. And there are two definitions of this nitya baddha. Nitya baddha means we're thrown in the material energy and we're illusioned to identify ourselves with the body. But there is another definition which states or describes us to want to create conditions by which we can be happy. We're always trying to line up material energy according to our plans, according to our mental state, our sensual perceptions of things, that if I could get this, if I had that, if I joined these things together, we're trying to manipulate the material energy in such a way to satisfy ourselves. So this is a conditioning that we have, and it's described to be anadi. Anadi means there's no beginning. We cannot trace the time that the living entity has been in the material world. How long we've been here, it's inconceivable. We do not know. So there's a very strong conditioning that is there from so many lifetimes of 8,400,000 species of existence. So when Krishna was trying to instruct Arjuna on the yoga process and so forth, Arjuna admitted to Krishna, Chanchala Himana Krishna, that this path is very difficult, for the mind is very turbulent. It's flickering, Chanchala. It's constantly going here and there. So Krishna said, yes, he admits, he acknowledged that. But he said it's possible by constant practice and detachment. So this is what basically the Grihastha ashram is. It's an ashram. An ashram means fenced in. It's not a wild process, but it's a fenced in process by which the devotee tries to regulate himself, recognizing that in this material world there's suffering, and how to free ourselves of that suffering. So Krishna says that although one may be very sinful, once he enters into the boat of transcendence, then on that boat he'll be able to cross over this misery. So this is very important, because a living entity, you can just imagine if you're in the ocean all by yourself, how are you going to survive? But if a boat comes and picks you up, you're in a safe spot, but you're not in a good spot in the sense that you're still in the ocean, but you're in a better spot than you were when you were in the water, because there's a certain safety there. So that's what Krishna says. Once you have transcendental knowledge, you're in a safe position, but you're not on land. We're a species of the land. We're not meant to be in the water. So we may still be in the material energy. We may still be in the covering of this material world, but now we have the weapon. As Krishna says, with the sword of knowledge, you can fight. So now, being on that boat of transcendence, we can work our way towards the shore. And the Grihastha ashrams, more specifically than maybe the other ashram, I sometimes describe it as untying the boat or lifting the anchor. Prabhupada tells that story of the wedding. They came at night, they all got on the boat, and because it was late, they all went to sleep, and the boatmen were rowing, and the next morning they woke up, all the guests, and they realized they hadn't left the shore, and they wondered why. So someone looked around and so forth, and they finally figured, hey, we didn't even untie the boat. So even though they were rowing and rowing, the boat didn't go anywhere because it was tied to the dock. So Grihastha life means lifting that anchor, realizing that, okay, I've got some attachment, I've got some conditioning, and I may continue. And Prabhupada describes that in this purport, that proper understanding one's constitutional position in relationship to Krishna is so nice that it can at once lift one from the struggle of existence, which goes on in the ocean of nescience. This material world is sometimes regarded as an ocean of nescience and sometimes as a blazing fire. So this is a good example also, blazing fire. Sometimes we say you have to be in the fire of Krishna consciousness, but we also say that you have to conquer the fire of lust. So we kind of use that example of fire from two different angles, you could say. Because lust and love is really the same element. It's just the opposite. Just like when you take electricity and you can either create a fridge that will cool down the items and freeze the items in the freezer, or you can take that electricity and create a stove that will heat up the elements and cook the elements. So the electricity is the same, but it's manipulated differently. That one creates ice and the other one can create heat or vaporize or vapor, the water. So our process of Krishna consciousness is to recognize that that energy is there. And sometimes other philosophers I've tried to acknowledge that, yes, there's suffering in this material world. We are conditioned, but just like Charvaka, his idea of lokayas, his philosophy is that don't meditate on the negative aspects of this world. Don't consider the suffering. Just enjoy life. And if there is any suffering, just move on. Just get up, get yourself back up and just go on your way and just try to enjoy. And that philosophy did not acknowledge karma, reincarnation, life after death, anything, or God or the demigods, nothing. Just pure existence. I'm here now and I'm going to just try to enjoy because that's what I want. And who cares about the rest? So that's a philosophy that tries to bring the understanding or recognizing that there's suffering in the material world and how to cope with that by just ignoring the suffering. Well, you have other philosophers like Gautama in Canada who had the philosophy of Nyaya philosophy or Vaisheshika, that they acknowledge the Vedas, they acknowledge the soul, but for them the soul is a combination of what? Of matter and consciousness. And when those two come together, you have life. So there's an understanding of recognition of karma, because why? Their question goes a little bit further, that, well, why is there suffering? So there's suffering because there's karma. So I did something bad and now I'm reaping. As you sow, so shall you reap, like it says in the Bible. So I must have done something bad. Now I'm reaping bad results. So I have to be careful. I have to guide my life in such a way that I'm moral, that I follow, some religious principles and so forth. And this way I'll diminish my suffering of this world. But then Buddha came along and he said, no, because you may be a very honest person, and so you may not be fearing the police. You may not get bad karma. You may just get good karma. But even good karma is entangling. Just like you may not fear the police, but that doesn't mean you're not going to get robbed. You may still get robbed, despite the fact that you're on the side of the police. Police are there to protect you, but still you'll get robbed. So this material world is a nasty place. And we acknowledge that. Padam padam navi padam natesham. There's suffering at every step. The different kleshas are there. So their process is that nirvana. Stop all desire, stop all activities. And therefore, if you don't water the plant will die naturally. It's just a question of time. You're not feeding it. So that was more or less Buddha's thing, that if you stop all activity, you'll stop all consciousness, and therefore there's no reincarnation. And nirvana means spiritual suicide, that the soul no longer will exist. And in that way, Prabhupada gives that example of the father who brings the son to the house to see the doctor, and he says, my son has a huge fever. So the doctor gives him a pill, and the son and the father leaves. And a few days back, he comes back. The father says, my son's not breathing anymore. The doctor says, well, is there a fever? The doctor, the father says, no, there's no fever, but there's no life. Okay, I've done my business. I've eliminated the fever. So, but our process is not to kill the patient. We want to eliminate the fever. We want to eliminate the suffering in the material world, but we don't want to kill the patient. So Krishna consciousness is a process by which we utilize our propensities and our attachment and even this lust in the service of Krishna. So therefore, we're trying to untie the boat, specifically Grihastha ashram. Of course, all the ashrams of Krishna consciousness, Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, Sannyas, we're all recognizing there's a suffering. We're all trying to get out of this nitya bada situation where we're eternally conditioned and go back to our eternal natural situation, which is Krishna consciousness. But being in the water and not being on land, what do you do in between? You got to work yourself towards the land. You can't stay just in the boat and think, okay, everything's great. I'm on the boat. I'm no longer in the ocean. Fantastic. No, you got to get on the land. So there's a process to do that. And depending on what your consciousness is, then one may be rowing, but the Grihastha is lifting the anchor, untying the boat. And I also give an example because Prabhupada talks about the fire here in this particular purport, that when you have a fire, you can, a house fire, let's say, you can easily get the firemen to come and water it down, hose it down and the fire is extinguished. But when you have a forest fire, that's a different situation. Often the forest rangers, they can't just hose it down, and especially you have no means of doing that. There's no fire hydrants, and you may have a lake close by where you can pump the water out, but you may not have that. So often if you have a fire, let's say that started on north and is working its way south, you can light a fire south and direct it towards the north. Because as the fire burns, it consumes its combustible material and it can't go back. It's burnt everything, so it has to go forward. So if you light another fire from the south and you control that fire and you bring it towards the north, that fire north going south and the south fire going north, they both come together and they extinguish themselves. So that's a little bit the process of Krishna consciousness, where you have a male may be lusty, a woman may be lusty, they get together through the blessings of the spiritual master, through that transcendental boat of transcendental knowledge, and they try to extinguish that fire of conditional life, because that condition of life will cause one to have repeated birth and death, to stay in the material world, and the material world is a place of suffering, as Krishna says. And here, Rupa Goswami describes that, he says that sense gratification is required, but not simply we shall devote our lives for sense gratification. So that is the difference between the Grihamedi and the Grihastha Adhikari. The Grihastha means that he has a spiritual component within that. It's not just mundane activity, but he's added Krishna through the process. Prabhupada gives that example that if you have zero, you may have so many zeros, it's still a zero. But if you have one and you put a zero, then you have 10, you have 100, you have 1,000. So we put Krishna in front of everything. And because of that, it becomes spiritualized. So our process is that as we add Krishna to our lives, gradually, one will increase and the other one will decrease. And therefore, as our consciousness gets purified, we'll start becoming more transcendental. Our conditioning will diminish because that conditioning for sensual pleasure, for sense gratification is there. And as Rupa Goswami says, it's something that is required. It's there. You cannot just pretend that it's not there. But how are you going to cope with that? You have to have a coping mechanism, and you have to have a means by which, just like wood, if the wood is green, you put it in the fire, it won't burn. You have to shelter that wood so that it gradually gets dry. When it's dry, You put it in the fire, it'll burn very nicely. But if it's wet, it won't. So Grihastha life is a sheltered environment by which one is no longer subjected to the onslaught of material energy, dumping its rain on the living entity. There's a protection there that causes the living entity to eventually, as he dries up or becomes Krishna consciousness, as Krishna consciousness develops more and more, he'll be able to surmount the material environment, the material energy, and he will also be able to see Krishna within everything. That's what we're trying to accomplish. The material energy is devoid of Krishna. The spiritual energy is full of Krishna. That is the difference between material and spiritual. For Krishna, it's all his energy. There's no material energy for Krishna. But for us, the material energy is there because that energy causes us what? To think that we're the controllers. Prakriti kriyamanani gunar karmani sarvasa ahankara vimudatma kartahang iti manyate. Out of false ego, we identify with the body and we think this body to be ours, and we are the enjoyers and the controllers of this world. So that idea or vision puts Krishna aside, puts us in the forefront. And the devotee, he wants to see himself as an anga of Krishna, as a part and parcel of Krishna. Not that I'm Krishna, but I'm part and parcel of Krishna. And being part and parcel, I'm meant to serve Krishna. So that is our position. And here is a very nice purport that Prabhupada gave in the 8th canto in the story of Gajendra, the elephant, and the crocodile. Gajendra, being the elephant, went in the water to bathe. Crocodile grabbed his leg, and for 1,000 years they struggled. And Prabhupada explains that in the fighting between the elephant, this purport was specifically addressed at the time that one sannyasi had fallen down. And although it addresses a sannyasi, it also addresses anyone who wants to be a devotee of Krishna in Krishna consciousness, or a devotee of Krishna. So in the fighting between the elephant and the crocodile, the difference was that although the elephant was extremely powerful, he was in a foreign place in the water. During 1,000 years of the fighting, he could not get any food, and under the circumstances, his bodily strength diminished. And because his bodily strength diminished, his mind also became weak and his senses less powerful. The crocodile, however, being an animal of the water, had no difficulty. He was getting food, and he was therefore getting mental strength and sensual encouragement. Thus, while the elephant became reduced in strength, the crocodile became more and more powerful. Now, from this, we may take the lesson that in our fight with Maya, we should not be in a position in which our strength, enthusiasm, and senses will be unable to fight vigorously. Our Krishna consciousness movement has actually declared war against the illusory energy in which all living entities are rotting in the false understanding of civilization. The soldiers of this Krishna consciousness movement must always possess physical strength, enthusiasm, and sensual power. To keep themselves fit, they must therefore place themselves in a normal condition of life. What constitutes the normal condition will not be the same for everyone, and therefore there are divisions of Varnashram: Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra, Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas. Especially in this age, Kali Yuga, it is advised not to take sannyas. So Prabhupada goes on. From this, we can understand that in the age, the sannyas ashram is forbidden because people are not so strong. So Prabhupada says that this is what we have to do. We have to fight according to our mental disposition. What consciousness we have to find. And we give the example of when you go to war, some fight on land as soldiers, some fight in the air and with airplanes or aviation, some fight on water, the Marines, or underwater in submarines. But the idea is you have to fight. Or we could give the example of someone who comes to the temple. We're not really concerned how he made it. Did he walk to the temple? Did he take a bicycle? Did he take a taxi, a bus? That's not really the issue. The issue is, did he come to the temple? Great, you made it. You came to the temple. So that's the important thing. How you actually make it, it's a different thing. It's not that important. So if you want as a brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas, it's not that important. but are you becoming Krishna conscious? Are you putting yourself in a situation by which you'll, as Prabhupada says here, you'll be enthusiastic, you'll feel fed, you'll feel naturally in a natural environment by which you can fight against the declaration that you've made against Maya. Maya is what? That I think I'm this body, I think I'm the enjoyer. So this is a little bit, of course, there are other verses that warns also at the same time, because as I said, you're in the boat, you're not on the land. So just because you've gotten on that boat doesn't mean your success. It's better than being in the water, but it's not, you're not there yet. So there's a time period by the time the boat will eventually get to the shore and you'll walk on land, and that will be your full Krishna consciousness. But until then, you have to be in a position by which you can protect your Krishna consciousness and avoid the waves of Maya. And there are other verses that says life's desire should never be directed towards sense gratification. One should desire only a healthy life for self-preservation, since human life or human beings are meant to inquire about the absolute truth. Nothing else should be the goal of one's work. So we should work with that intention. That focus is that I'm trying to do all this to ultimately become Krishna conscious. It's like you prepare a fire, but if you never strike the match, all that effort is kind of wasted. So you have to always keep in mind that the Grihastha ashram is an ashram that will eventually allow you to strike that match. But if you don't do it, it's kind of a wasted thing. Now, I'm not exactly sure, because we talked with Krishna Dulal. He said that this was a topic devotees wanted to discuss. This is more a philosophical aspect that I've just presented. I haven't presented a practical aspect to this. The Grihastha life, if one wants to become a Grihastha, how does he find a husband? How does he find a wife? One time they asked Srila Prabhupada, what should a woman who's looking for a husband, what should she look for? And of course, devotees, they were in the morning walk. Devotees said, oh, they should know Bhagavad Gita, should be able to quote slokas, should be able. I said, no, he should be a provider. He should be a provider. Like Krishna says, Sarvadhamam Parityajamamikam Saranam Vraja, that if you surrender to me, what will be the consequence? I will reward you. I will give you shelter. So a husband has to be someone who can give shelter to a wife who, is supposed to surrender to the husband. And that's a big topic in itself. Surrender, what do we mean by surrender? It doesn't mean slave mentality, but there has to, in other words, a respectful attitude towards the husband. But the husband has to also have a respectful attitude towards the wife. So, but if also someone wants to or would like, brahmachari, whatever he's looking, I suggest practically that someone should go and live with a Grihastha couple. Go live with someone that you admire as Grihastha, who is respectful, who you see they're mature in their ashram, they're Krishna conscious devotees who are dedicated to Krishna consciousness, and go and see how they live for a couple of weeks. If you get that opportunity to be allowed to do that, that would allow you to see practically how is it taking place. It's not just a physical infatuation that you just love the person because, wow, she's handsome or beautiful, or it's going to require a little bit more of that. And the person you do find where you decide to spend a good part of your life as a Grihastha, before you can start saying that you love that person, and love, you have to understand what's that component of love. Before love, there has to be admiration. If you don't admire the person you're with, you're going to have a hard time serving that person. You have to have an admiration for the person you're with. You have to find that person interesting. You have to find that person, and because you admire that person and you admire the quality of that person, then it becomes very natural to want to serve that person, because love means service. If you're not going to serve a person, don't say you love them, because that's what it means. Love means service. Of course, in the material world, we often think that I'm going to be served. Like Prabhupada said, the king for a day, slave for a lifetime. But that slave mentality, that's our position. We are servants of Krishna. So the quicker we get that understanding that I'm actually a servant, I'm not the enjoyer, that I'm the secondary enjoyer. I only enjoy when I render service to others. Then I can enjoy. But to try to enjoy independently, that's not the proper mentality. So I think that unfortunately in ISKCON we're not a big success story in our Grihastha ashram or in many of the ashrams per se. So I think devotees probably don't have the maturity or the understanding of what they're getting involved in what it means, the Grihastha ashram, and have a mature outlook that you're going to be getting married and you're going to live with a person for at least 25 years. So you better know what you're doing. It's not like just, overeating and the next day I'll fast and everything will be okay. It's not like that. It's a much bigger commitment. And one has to be matured enough and understand what he's trying to accomplish in that Grihastha ashram, the benefit of the Grihastha ashram, and he has to value that. If he thinks that, oh, I got married and I fell down, this is, I should have been a sannyasi, or I should have been, this is not like a very prestigious position to be a Grihastha. Sometimes that connotation is there in ISKCON. There's a lack of maturity. Grihastha ashram is not that well respected in some corners, you could say, corners of ISKCON, or some mindsets of people that are practicing Krishna consciousness. So if you have that kind of attitude, as I remember Vishwakarma, he was the president of Toronto, and when Srila Prabhupada came there, I think it was 76, 75, 76, I forget now. There were, many brahmacharis were making a lot of devotees in those days. So there are a lot of single men and single women. And there was an interest, that some of them wanted to get married. So Vishwakarma asked Srila Prabhupada, that is it true that when a brahmachari gets married, it's a fall down? The Prabhupada said, what's the question of falling when you're at the bottom of a well? Prabhupada always had good answers. And that's the fact. We're at the bottom of the well. So, we're not nothing to be proud of. So we have to be mature to take the help that we require. We have to take the medicine that is required for us. And one medicine may not be the medicine for us. So we have to know that. And we have to take advice from senior devotees and maybe our spiritual masters, if we feel inclined to do so, to help us, to guide us, because Krishna consciousness is not a lineal thing. It's a family spirit with many people there that can help us and guide us and direct our lives in such a way that we can benefit from the different aspects that are there, Vanashram that is there to help us become Krishna conscious. So I'll stop here. I don't know what time normally you stop the class, and but I'll definitely enjoy if you have any questions, because I could have spoken for half an hour and nothing new. You haven't learned anything, but you may have more specific questions that addresses you. So I always enjoy questions because it's more direct.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
This is Nicole from New Brunswick.
Mm-hmm.
I know Gokulunanda Das for many years. I used to be in Ottawa.
Okay.
But now I'm retired. I came back home to New Brunswick. I just wanted to mention, you are correct about what you sow, so shall you reap in the Bible.
Yes.
But what people don't know, I'm sure you do, but in general, people don't know, apparently Buddha said this 500 years before Jesus. So it kind of makes you wonder.
Yeah. Well, a good thing is worth repeating. So because we're creatures of forgetfulness. We tend to forget things. So if we can remember, be told many times the same thing, then maybe we'll get it. And that's important. So if Buddha said it, as Jesus said it, as long as it's a good thing that they've said, we're interested in hearing about it.
And I keep coming across this wherever I don't think it's a coincidence anymore, but in the last couple of weeks, I keep coming up with finding this on the internet suddenly or different ways in a book. And I'm wondering, I think it's starting to get through it in my brain finally, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, I appreciate your talk very, very much, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for listening and being here.
Thank you. And give my Hare Krishna to Gokul Donanda Das, please.
Okay, I will.
Please. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, devotees. You could actually, if you're shy, you're not sure when to plug in, feel free to use the feature at the bottom of a chat where you can just raise your hand and we can go along the list and pick you. If you think of a question that you have or a comment that you'd like to voice, then feel free to raise a hand. Oh, I see a hand coming up. First on the list, we have Mandala Ram Prabhu. Take it away, Prabhu. Go for it.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you so much. That was very inspiring comments and positive outlook on the Grihastha ashram. I really like that, and it's the proper way of seeing the Grihastha ashram. I think, especially being in the Grihastha ashram, is a good way to see it. So
We have to encourage ourselves. No one else will.
So just going to play, I guess, devil's advocate. Those were definitely all positive outlooks. And, what happens if, we may struggle in the, like you said, there, sometimes these things happen where in our movement, there may be struggles. How is the best way to overcome that within, intimate relationships and mend maybe relationships that may have built up some tension?
Well, I think we have to be mature and we have to be realistic. I mean, we're not Rupa Goswami and we're not going to become Rupa Goswami overnight. So there's a conditioning there. And Prabhupada says, that conditioning is a reality. Their demands, the senses are demanding things. And therefore, Grihastha ashram is a recognition of that. We're acknowledging that. We're not trying to be something we're not. We're Grihasthas. And we have to become regulated. If you're going to get cured, first thing is you have to regulate yourself. Just like when you take prescription drug, there's a regulation. Some pills you take before going to bed, some pills you take during the meal, some pills you take before meal. So there's a prescription, there's a regulation. So our regulation is we remain faithful to one woman. We're not, our minds are no longer predicated. Is this the one? Is that the one? Am I going here? Am I going there? And therefore, because of that, we're regulated. So we may have some intimacy with our wives, not wives, but wife. and that's not, one should not take that so, of course, there's not a license for prostitution, Prabhupada said, when you get married, but it's a license. License means you're allowed to practice. That's what a license means. If I have a license to drive a car, I'm entitled to drive a car. That's the license. It allows me to do that. So, but it's a license, which means there's danger at that. Driving a car, you could kill someone. So that's why we have to license it. We don't let anybody drive a car. You have to be qualified. So Grihastha has to be qualified, but he has a license. He's not a sannyasi, nor is he a brahmachari. He's a Grihastha. So he has to regulate that. And sometimes I think devotees are immature and they start blaming each other and resenting each other. And that's not how it's supposed to go. It's not a mature outlet. One has to help each other progress gradually to a state of consciousness that you're going to want to be. And that state is vanaprastha. There's 25 years of Grihastha life, and there's 25 years, ideally, of course, that can change. We have people taking sannyas earlier and so forth and so on. Some people staying brahmachari their whole life. But from a varnashram, strictly, speaking, 25-year brahmachari, 25-year grihastha, 25-year vanaprastha, and 25-year sannyasi. So that 25-year period of a grihastha, there's stages. Just like sannyas, there's 4 stages of sannyas. There's stages of grihastha, where yes, in the beginning, you're young, you may be, physically and maybe a little, okay, but that will eventually wind itself out. just with old age. As you get older, that's gradually disappears if you're doing things properly. And if you're not neglecting your spiritual side, that's the thing also. You want to be in a position where you have enough contentment, where you're content, your mind's not being predicated by so many things, and therefore you can focus on Krishna. And as you focus on Krishna, as you develop strength on that level, it'll be easier to, wind down the other things. Just like now we're adults. You may look at a toy of a child, but it doesn't tell you anything. You're not interested in sitting down there and playing with that toy. Although you did that when you were a kid, at this stage of our lives, we have no intention of that. We've moved on. Now we're still looking for pleasure, but our pleasure has matured to something else. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to mature to something else, but in the beginning that may be there. And eventually you start developing a relationship with your wife as friends and relationship of devotees, where you admire the person you're with because she's a devotee of Krishna. She's dedicated to Krishna. You're dedicated to Krishna. That's the glue. The karmis, their glue is just sex life. Oh, we had great sex life. That we're together. But no, our principle is we're trying to develop Krishna consciousness. So when you mature, and that's why I was saying in the beginning, one point I was mentioning, you have to admire the person you're with, because as you admire that person, then the other things will diminish, and there'll be other things that you'll gravitate, you'll levitate towards. You'll appreciate the person you're living with without that need for physical contact. But in the beginning, yeah, that will be there. But don't curse yourself if it happens. Or, I'm not saying necessarily you, but anyone who's listening, don't curse yourselves in the process. Be patient with it. It's going to eventually work if you're patient. You take medicine, it's not you take one pill, the next day you're cured. Like they say now with this vaccine, with the coronavirus. You take the vaccination, it's not next day you walk around with no mask or nothing and you're cured. It's going to take time before your immune system works with this vaccination and you become immune. But it will take some time. So you have to be patient. Everything takes time. We can't take Krishna consciousness cheaply and think that, okay, now I want, we have to realize that for so long we've rejected Krishna. Now in this life, by the mercy of the spiritual master, we've decided we want Krishna. But that shouldn't be an act of arrogance. Okay, Krishna, I want you to snap my finger and Krishna is going to appear. We have to reestablish our relationship with Krishna. And that's going to be, will Krishna want to establish a relationship with us? I mean, of course, a relationship is always there, but we're not aware of that relationship right now in our conditioned state. So we have to reawaken that relationship. And until then, until that relationship is not awakened, what relationship do we have? We have a relationship with the material energy. That's the relationship we have right now. We're dealing with material energy. That's the relationship we have. But we're trying to change that relationship to a relationship of Krishna. So gradually you unwind one as you move on to the next. You make one step and then you move on to the next step. You can't just, so that's what I would say in that answer to your question, that one has to be patient. And that's a sign of devotion. Also, that we're patient. We're ready to, whatever it's going to take. I'm going to be determined to stick with it no matter what. Does that answer your
thank you, Prabhu. And maybe just a quick follow-up one, because I know probably other devotees have something. But I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but if you develop, say, resentment either towards one's wife or the wife towards the husband, either because maybe you think that they're not performing their duties, or maybe they develop it towards, especially the husband, because maybe they're not, giving love or attention, or too focused on Krishna consciousness and forget about, doing those things. How to cure that resentment? I don't know if you can relate or if you've really experienced that in your relationship, but maybe you have some tips for myself and maybe others who.
Well, resentfulness often comes to the fact that we feel we have not been, we're deserving of more than what we're receiving. But our philosophy is not trying to receive, we're trying to give. If you start analyzing, okay, I did this for you, and now you owe this for me, and no, that's not the process. The process is that we have to learn that I'm a servant. So when I serve, that's actually to my best interest. If I can learn to serve a part and parcel of Krishna, then gradually I can learn to serve Krishna. The difference between the attitude that a Grihastha have is this: my mind may be focused on his wife and family, and the sannyasi, he's focused on the whole world. You know, I don't know if you get my point, but both are servants. One is serving is what he feels his immediate relationship, his family, his wife, his possession, while the sannyasi has a broader vision where he sees himself serving the whole world. But unless you develop that serving attitude, you'll have trouble in all the ashrams. If you think I've taken sannyas, now everyone should be serving me, where's my maha plate? You really got a wrong conception of what sannyas is. And if you think, okay, I got married, where's my wife, where's my plate, where's my this, that you have a wrong attitude. But you can discuss these things also. There should be a very discussion saying, listen, this happened, I really feel bad about it, but this is how I'm feeling, so that the other person can have a little bit, understanding of what's going on. You're supposed to be, when you get married, there's not me and you, there's us. Like if you get sick, you're not going to reject your body. You're going to want to cure the body, right? There's no rejection of if you have a headache, if you have you're depressed, or you're always trying to, cure yourself. So when you're with someone else, your wife, it's not like you and me, it's us. We're working together, we're a team. So if something's happening and you feel that, then you can express it, in such a way, in a respectful way, and try to understand what's going on, why you're feeling that, what you feel that is neglecting or whatnot. But deep down, we have to understand that we're servants of Krishna. And the more we do focus on our sadhana, more we'll get to the right position that we should be in, because ultimately we're supposed to be Krishna conscious. So all the problems originate really because we're not Krishna conscious, So to the degree we're not, then there'll be, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning, there'll be suffering. We're dealing with the mind and the senses. We're pulling and so forth. So, but Krishna consciousness may not be at our doorstep immediately. We're something we're working towards. But you're living with someone, and that you have to express these things to that person you're living with.
Nice, thank you so much, Prabhu.
I don't know if it helps or answers the question.
Yeah, those are definitely some good tips. Discussing, kind of opening one's mind up and having that reflective listening. I remember we did that in like premarital counseling. That's always recommended for devotees, just to see how to work through problems. So it's a nice reminder. Thank you so much.
And we have to understand, why do I have this problem? Is it my own ego? You cannot artificially impose your ideas on the person you're with. You're with a person, that person has their own idea of what they're going to do. And Grihastha life doesn't mean that the wife is just the shadow of the husband. I turn left, she turns left, I turn right, she turns right. That's not, she has her life, I have my life. We're working together, and then you have to figure out who's good at what. Maybe you're good at cooking and your wife maybe doesn't like cooking. Well, then do the cooking, and maybe she'll wash the floors and do the laundry, or, when I first got with Sarada, she was a teacher. She already had a job. I didn't have a job. I was a brahmachari. So I would stay at home and I would cook and do the household things. And, when Uddhava would come from school, I'd be taking care of him. And, we'd go out and play in the snow and do stuff. And, so it wasn't a thing that, okay, this is the role. I'm a man. I don't touch this or I don't do that. You have to be practical, and do the needful and see who's strong. You're a team. So you're back to back working on the same team. So when you have a team, one guy may be the goaler, one may be the front man, one may be the defense. You're trying to work in such a way that you're the strongest in the positions you place yourself in. So it doesn't really matter what you're doing, but if you're doing it in such a way that you're straightening both people, you have some expertise in certain things, another person has, so you have to see that and levitate to the things that where you're good at. And then if certain things, you have to compromise and adjust and be with the person you're with, And if you admire the person you're with, all these things become much easier. But if you don't have that admiration for the person, you'll start thinking less of them. And then you'll start thinking, well, I could be with someone better, or she's not like this, or he's not like that. I didn't expect it. And then the whole mental thing starts, But if you admire the person that you're with, and if you have difficulty, then find the reasons to admire the person and see the benefit of what that person is doing in your life, stabilizing your life, where you don't have to go everywhere. You're in a like a stable environment that allows you to execute Krishna consciousness. So sometimes people lose that factor that, what am I accomplishing? Well, you're accomplishing a stable base, a solid foundation by which the house can be built. If you don't have a solid foundation, the whole house will collapse. So Grihastha life gives you a solid foundation, So it's a mode of goodness environment that you're trying to have, a very clean environment, sattvic. So when you come, then it's easy to be Krishna conscious because that element is there. It's a stable environment. No.
Super, Prabhu. So many good points, and I'm sure other devotees have something. I don't want to hog the airwaves the whole time, but they're all amazing points. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mandalaram Prabhu.
Really helpful.
Thank you. So I do have a couple of questions here in text, and they're it looks like they're pretty similar. So I could probably lead both questions to you, and you could perhaps decide, Prabhu, how you would like to answer. So one of them is anonymous. The question is, what duties and attitudes should a husband have towards his wife and wife towards husband, according to the teachings of Srila Prabhupada? So except just providing, a house, clothes, food, and things like this. So that's one question. And then another question I hear, which is to everyone, was it says, you mentioned that a husband has to give shelter to his wife. Could you please expand on what does giving shelter mean? So I think some similarities there.
Well, shelter means that he has to provide, in the sense that, there's human necessities that have to be there. There's food that have to be put on the table. The place has to pay. Bills have to be paid. So the husband has to be prepared to pay that, to play that role, to provide. He has to be a hard worker. And Prabhupada tells of his own life when he went to Dr. Bosch's pharmacy to be hired. The first question I asked, are you a family man? Because a family man has to be responsible. He can't just take off. A single guy can just take off, but a family man has so many considerations. So you have to be that person who has those considerations in place, that you have to provide. You have to work. You have to, So that's provision. And when we look at the Gopal Bhatta Goswami at the Radha Raman temple, he made his grihasthas the pujaris of the temple because they're stable. Sannyasis are all over the place. They're flying here, they're preaching, but grihasthas. And in Radha Raman temple, what they do is each 2 years, one family adopts Radha Raman as like their child. They take care of all the deity worship, all the prasadam, the cooking. They do all these things, and then after 2 years, it goes on to another family. So this is a system that they have because the grihasthas are a stable element that can, because deity worship is a punctual thing. You got to be very punctual. So as far as the attitude towards one's wife and husband, it should be very, very respectful. They asked one person, how is it that you've been married for so many years? And that person said, we never said anything to harm each other. So you have to be very careful with the way you deal with the person, because once you shoot an arrow, it's very difficult to bring it back. But as the point, as I mentioned, if you have respect, you have to have admiration. If you admire the person you're with, then it becomes very easy to deal with that person, because you're interested in what that person has to say. You admire that person's intelligence, you admire that person's integrity, you admire that person's devotion towards Krishna, the honesty of that person, you admire the qualities of that individual. And when you admire someone, well, it's natural you want to hear from that person, and you take into consideration what that person is saying. You're not trying to lord it over or undermine that person or think, yeah, well, you don't have it together, you don't know what you're talking about. No, you have admiration, you respect that person. So that has to be the attitude that a person has towards someone. And if you have admiration, another important aspect of it is you won't take the relationship for granted. Familiarity breeds content. If you become content with that person, they say that people who do stage performance, prior to going on stage, they always have butterfly in their stomach. And if they lose that, they've lost it, in the sense that they've lost respect for the audience. That when they go on, they always want to make sure that their act is going to be worthy of the audience that they're going to be serving. So we always have to make sure that we don't become familiar with the person we're with. We always have to be respectful and dutiful that I'm with a Vaishnav and I have to get my act together. I can't just be a louch, just lying around doing nothing. There's an expectation there that I'll be the devotee and up to the standard that is expected, at least minimum chanting my rounds and reading and doing devotional things. So being loyal. So these are certain things that person has to have if he's going to be in a relationship in a respectful manner and make that work. I don't know if that answers.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Thank you for your answer. Roger has a question here.
I was just going to just a comment that I really liked that point that you were kept repeating, but you mentioned initially in your talk about having admiration for your partner, and this is really going to give us that respect. And in the same way, I was thinking then it's this kind of introspective thing, that what qualities do I have that will contribute to the relationship, and how am I also what qualities can I develop that my partner will have the same admiration for me? So it's kind of this nonstop internal work that's going on.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, how am I going to inspire my partner? That's an aspect that we want to be. We want to be an inspiration for the person who we're with. That even Prabhupada said that he needed to be inspired, and he was a pure devotee. But the behavior of his disciples, if they went out and did book distribution, if they did things that it would inspire him to write more, to do things more. So we have to be an inspiration with the person we're with, and that becomes, again, I think it's a very essential point that if you have admiration for the person, naturally these things will follow. They'll naturally follow because you have admiration for the person you're with. But if you take the person you're with for granted, then it becomes an ordinary thing. You don't feel like you're obliged to do anything special because you don't really value that person. You don't value the contribution that person is providing in your existence, in your life. And sometimes a person may have to be reminded of that, unfortunately. But we should be able to easily remind ourselves that, wow, I'm fortunate. I'm able to live with such a person. And that person is a wonderful devotee, a wonderful human being, a wonderful person. And you naturally, with admiration, you naturally have gratitude. And that's also very important to have gratitude towards, just like you can't, even the gopis or the inhabitants of Vrindavan, in the background, they all know that Krishna is God. And because they know Krishna is God and they have a respectful attitude in the background, in the forward, they can play with Krishna, they can do things with Krishna in a very humorous or fun way, because in the background, they have that understanding. They never try to become Krishna. They never had that attitude because, so just like when you admire someone, you can also make a joke with that person. Because if you make a joke of a person, two things, either the person will laugh or they'll be insulted. And that will be based on the relationship. If the person knows that deep down you really love them, then yeah, you can sometimes make a little joke even at their expense, because they don't mind, because they know that despite my fault, I know you love me. But if I don't feel that, then you've just insulted me. So to be intimate with someone means there has to be that very deep respect amongst the two persons. And then you can have a very nice relationship. But if that's not there, if that element is missing, then it's gonna kind of be an awkward situation. There'll be awkward moments that you may be able to kind of overcome and, you know, go over the bumps, but there'll be bumps in the marriage. But if you want a smooth sailing, then if you have these elements that where you have admiration and you feel grateful for being with the person, you know, you're living with, then everything else will be much easier to work. And you'll see that with these two things, these two qualities, there'll be very little issue in the couple. But if these things are not there, you'll see these couples are often fighting and arguing and not agreeing, and, you know, because in that attitude, you don't particularly care what the issues, you know, the issues that we're together. That's the real thing. The rest, what colors the wall and what this we're eating and what we're doing, and you don't particularly care about these things. That's not the basis of the relationship. The relationship is that we're just happy to be together. Not that because we're together and there has to be, like Sita, she didn't even mind going to the forest. She was insulted that Ram didn't want to take her to the forest. So I'm your better half. You have to take me. You know, and Ram was saying, come on, you're a princess. You can't go in the forest. How are you going to live there? But she didn't. She just wanted to be with Ram. She didn't want to be anywhere else. She couldn't care less where she was as long as she was with Ram. So that's what we have to have, that relationship. Oh, we don't particularly care. So then what are we fighting about? We're arguing about what? What's the essence of that argument? Who cares if we do this or we do that? As long as we're together and we're happy, that's the important thing. But that's there when you have admiration and respect and, you know, gratitude towards the person you're with.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. So one last question. For me, I have a question. You said that you gave an advice that's saying that one thing that you can do to strengthen the bonds of Grihastha ashram, you can go and live with a more experienced senior Vaishnava or Grihastha couple for maybe a couple of weeks. So can we come and live with you for a couple of weeks?
Yeah, whenever you want, you can come.
What do you say? Jai. All right. One more question. We have Surendra Prabhu raised his hands. Do we have time for one more question, Lakshminath Prabhu? Maybe this will be the last one.
I've got all the time in the world. It's early.
Okay. Last question. Surendra Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. It was nice points you were mentioning. And but what should we do, or how should we react? And sometimes casual speaking can backfire. And offensing somebody or insulting someone, or somebody takes it as an offense, two different things. And sometimes when you live with, for example, me and Krishna Dalal, if we meet every day, 6 hours a day, it's not going to be a formal relationship. It's not possible to live like that. So I will say something and he will say something. And so in the casual relationship, when you say, and if someone is taking as an offense, what should be our behavior? Is that just to stop talking and be to the point, or this is the point basically.
Well, we have to see bodily language. We have to see that the person, obviously, I might have said something and maybe my intentions were good, but my words were misplaced or not properly, taught clearly. and or maybe I was a little passionate in my response or the way I responded. So we have to immediately apologize to that person and express that, no, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to offend you anything. These are the points that it doesn't mean that we ignore the points we're making. We can make the points, but they have to be made in a respectful manner. And if we feel we've offended the person or insulted them, or if the person misunderstood us, then we have to apologize and say, listen, I didn't mean to say these things in that way. I think you misunderstood. Please understand, this is what I'm trying to express. And if the person knows that deep down you respect him and you know that he's a dedicated devotee, it doesn't mean we'll always be on the same page. We're individuals. Prabhupada said when you put two utensils together, they make noise. So obviously there'll be noise, you know, and sometimes depending on the issues, we may be more heated than another. We may have an opinion, and there may be consequences to our decisions that we're making and so forth. So that all has to be taken into consideration. But there's never a place for being disrespectful. We always have to be respectful of the people we're with, because we're with Vaishnavas, we're with devotees. And there's no need, you know, to be harsh or to be insulting or to, you know, assassinate the character of the individual. In Prabhupada's time, there was never a question of you know, interpreting or character assassination or anything like that. Now we see, unfortunately, sometimes on the internet, people are doing these things. No, you know, always had respect for the devotees, that he's also a dedicated devotee towards Krishna, and he has his understanding and I have mine, and let's see how we can work together. You know, but the point being, if you feel that took place, then always immediately try to, because sometimes if it's too heated, it may not be the good time to say immediately, because the person so you know, depends on the circumstance. But if you let it drag on too long, what happens is the mind starts getting negative about the situation and then starts adding things. Oh yeah, that guy's like this, and if it takes too long, then the person, even though you apologize, will have a hard time accepting your apology, because in his mind he's been fabricating all these things for the past 2 weeks or a month or a year, and then you're coming back and trying to apologize. You say, yeah, this guy's pretty sharp, you know, he's saying these things, but I don't really believe him, you know. So I think there, you know, if it can be done immediately, that's the best thing to do. And then see, and there's always has to be compromise, in the sense that we're trying to spread Krishna consciousness. I may have an idea, another person has an idea. Okay, let's try your idea and we'll see. And if it brings results, fine. If it doesn't, then we'll try my idea. You know, we're not Krishna. We don't have the absolute vision on everything. Sometimes we may think we have a very good idea. May not be perceived like that by everyone. So yeah, okay, do it. Let's do it this way, and we'll see. And ultimately, we're serving Krishna, so there's no loss. You know, in any endeavor we're doing, there's no loss, because we're all trying to serve Krishna. But it may not present or bring the results that we are expecting. We want some results at the same time, because we want to do something for Krishna. So, but we may, you know, we may give and take in the relationship. There always has to be a give and take. It can't always be my way, you know. So I think that's things we have to keep in mind.
Thank you very much. It helps. Yes. Thank you very much. I mean, this topic can go on and on, but it's really helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. This was,
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak.
thank you.
Hopefully after this whole madness of the coronavirus, we can see each other personally, and I'll be happy to come to Ottawa and receive your wonderful associations.
Oh, we'd be thrilled to have you come in person, and maybe we can also, now that we know that we can zoom into you every once in a while.
Yeah.
And I'll be going to Montreal, Prabhu. This is Nicole again in New Brunswick. I'll be going to visit as soon as I can.
Okay, great. I'm sure
Yeah.
Bhavananda will be anxious to see you.
Yes, and I'll be anxious to see you too. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Glories to
Hare
Srila Prabhupada.
Krishna.
Jai Shri Prabhupada. Okay, dear devotees. So at this point, we're going to conclude our program. But before we do, just like Lakshminath Prabhu is saying, to keep on the track on the path of Krishna consciousness, to add the ones to the zero, we always have to remember to put Krishna there. And what a great segue. We have Krishna right on our front screen right here, Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda. So there will be maybe for a minute or so, a couple of minutes, opportunity to take some darshan, say some prayers, get the association of the Lord. And I'll take the opportunity right now to put a little plug for the following week. Next week, we have His Holiness Bhakti Anugraha Janardhan Swami, who will be giving a talk. And he is in Vancouver right now, but it's not his first time joining us on Zoom. He joined us a few months past, so he will be again joining us this coming Sunday. And thank you to all of those who submitted some questions. We sent out a survey asking devotees if there are topics that they would like to hear about, because very often our guest speakers ask us, well, is there something that you'd like us to talk about? Is there something relevant in your community? So we put out an email, and we had quite a few responses. I think altogether maybe 50 questions or so with from a few different sources. I think Mandal Ram had about 21 from himself, to be expected. Thank you, Prabhu. And yeah, so by all means, feel free to fill out the survey. You can answer the email with your suggestions and whatever you think is relevant to you. And hopefully we will get an opportunity to discuss that at some point in the future. Shri Shri Gaura Nitai ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.